Okay, thank you, Valerie. So first, thank you for the organizers, because it's my first time in Asia, in fact. So I'm very happy to be here, and it's a great pleasure for me. So my talk is about the average case analysis of Euclidean algorithms using a well-known method which is called dynamical analysis. And today I will focus on multiple GCD algorithms, more precisely algorithms that come from continued fraction expansion, in fact. So this is a joint work with Valérie, here, Brigitte Vallée, and Jean Creusefond. So first, I will recall what is a probabilistic analysis of an algorithm. Then I will describe the algorithms I will study. I will give the main results. I will try to give the main ideas of the methodology of dynamical analysis before concluding. So what is a probabilistic analysis of algorithm? It begins like a classical worst case analysis. So you have an algorithm, you have a set of inputs, of entries, you have a parameter that you want to study, for instance, the time complexity, the space complexity, or many things else. We have a notion of size, so each entry has a size, and we are interested by the asymptotic behavior of the parameter as the size of the inputs increases. So for instance, the worst case complexity, I am interested by the worst behavior of the parameters when the size of the inputs increases. So this is an asymptotic study. And for a probabilistic analysis, the main difference is that we are not only concerned by the worst case, we put a distribution on the input, so we pick at random each entry, in fact, and we are interested by the average behavior of our parameter. So in this context, our parameter becomes a random variable, in fact. So it is a sequence as the size increases. And usually, when we have a sequence of random variables, we are interested by the asymptotic mean value, the asymptotic variance, or higher moments, and one of the best things that we can do in probabilistic analysis is to obtain the limit law. So when we have the limit law of a parameter, we are able to describe what is the probability that the parameters takes value between a small interval. So it's a very precise analysis, in fact. So it describes very well the parameter. And today, I will speak about several limit laws. So Gaussian limit laws, beta limit laws. So the uniform law is a particular case, in fact, of beta law. And these three laws are continuous laws over an interval, but I will speak also about discrete laws, so a geometric law, very classical. So I will study algorithms that compute the GCD. So the most well-known algorithm to do this is the Euclid algorithm. So according to Knuth, it is the grandfather of all the algorithms because it is the oldest non-trivial algorithm that is still studied today. So the Euclid algorithm performs a sequence of Euclidean division, and the last non-zero remainder here is the GCD. So I am interested in the Euclid algorithms on integer inputs, on integer entries, positive, but also on polynomials on a finite field. So, yes, rather classical. Of course, there exist many other algorithms that compute the GCD of 2 and 3s, but I won't speak about them today. So, what are the previous probabilistic analyses of this algorithm, particularly on the Euclid algorithm? So the worst case was studied by Reynaud and Lamé a long time ago. So the Euclid algorithm performs at least a linear number of Euclidean division with respect to the size of input. Heilbronn and Dickson, around the 70s, obtained the mean value. So in average, the Euclid algorithm performs also an average number of Euclidean division with respect to the input size. And 20 years ago, 25 years ago, Hensley obtained the limit laws. And he proves that the number of Euclidean division, the number of steps, follows a Gaussian limit law. So, on polynomials, the situation is more classical because it is easier. Usually it is easier to analyze GCD algorithm on polynomials because it is more regular, in fact. And we know that the number of Euclidean division follows exactly a binomial law. So it's very easy to prove. You can do this, you can give this to a student, it's very easy. However, all these analyses were very specific to the Euclid algorithm and were very specific to the parameter number of steps. So if you want to study another algorithm, you have to change the methodology, and if you want to study another parameter, you have to change also the methodology. In the middle of the 90s, Brigitte Vallée has developed what we call dynamical analysis of algorithms. And with this method, you have a generic method to analyze several Euclidean algorithms on several parameters. So it's really generic. And so it was done by persons around Brigitte Vallée. And at the beginning, it was only average case analysis. So they compute only the mean value of the parameter. A few years later, in 2002, Brigitte Vallée and Viviane Valady have developed the methodology in order to perform distributional analysis. And they prove that a class of parameters called additive cost of moderate growth, but these parameters follow a Gaussian limit law. So among these parameters, we have, of course, the number of steps of the algorithm. So we recover, in fact, the previous results of Hensley, but it works, this method works also for other parameters. And very recently, this result was developed by Bettin and Drapeau, and they prove that a general class of additive costs that are no more of moderate growth follow a more general family of limit law, closed, stable laws. So among the stable law, there is the Gaussian limit law, the Gaussian law. So it is a more general result. The important thing here is that the analysis on two inputs integers or two inputs polynomials, is now well understood. There are technical details if we want to study other algorithms or other parameters, but the analysis of such algorithm is now well understood. So, what do we do now? In fact, we are interested in higher dimensional algorithm. So the first possible generalization of Euclid algorithm, it is a lattice reduction algorithm. I won't speak about them today. I am more interested by GCD algorithm that come from continued fraction expansion. So, what are the algorithms I want to study? What we have to understand is that with two inputs, we have to choose the Euclidean division. So the division, Euclidean, center, something else, and that's all. With more inputs, we have to choose the division, but we also have to choose which integers I will use in order to perform the division, where I will put the result in the list of integers, and so on. So I have a lot of choice, a lot of possible strategies, and of course, we want to study all these algorithms. So these are examples of GCD algorithm that you know, in fact. So they come from the continued fraction expansion area. So perhaps, for instance, the Selmer algorithm that divides the largest input by the smallest one, and then reorder. So this is just an example, but all these well-known strategies in the area of continued fraction expansion are possible. It's not the only way. I won't study here this algorithm. I will study two other algorithms. The naive one. So the naive algorithm is the algorithm that a student do if you ask him to compute the GCD between 5 integers. What does he do? He takes the first 2 integers and he uses the Euclid algorithm to compute the GCD. And then he takes the third input and he uses the Euclid algorithm to compute the GCD, and so on. So this is just a sequence of calls to the Euclid algorithm. So it is what we call the Knut algorithm because it is described in a well-known Knut book, The Art of Computer Programming. So this is the naive strategy, and I will call it either naive strategy or Knut algorithm. Another strategy that we heard during the week is the Brun algorithm. So the Brun algorithms use the Euclidean division between the largest input and the second largest one at each step. But I had 2 more constraints. I don't want 0 input. I want that all the entries are different. So, what an example of such execution is this one. I perform the Euclidean division between 74 and 37. The remainder is 0. So, in fact, I delete 74, and I should insert 0. But I won't do it because I don't want 0 entries. So, after the first Euclidean division, I lost 1 component. You have here 5 components. There remains only 4. And so on. For instance, at the end here, I perform the Euclidean division between 5 and 3. The remainder is 2, but 2 is already in the sequence. So I do not insert the remainder. Once more, I lose 1 component. So these are the 2 situations where I lost 1 component. Where I lose 1 component. So at the end, there remains only 1 component, and this is the GCD. So finally, what can we say? I will write this. There are 3 cases. The generic case, for instance, in the middle here, where I compute the remainder and I insert it. So I delete the greatest one and I insert the remainder. Or the remainder is 0, so I delete a component, I lose a component. Or either the remainder is already in the sequence, and once more, I lose 1 component. These are the 3 situations of the algorithm. So the algorithm can be seen as a sequence of phases. Each phase consists in losing 1 component. So here I have the first phase, the second phase, the third, the fourth, and the fifth. Okay, so what can we say about these two algorithms? They are very similar. First, they extend the Euclid algorithm. If you consider only two inputs, they are both the Euclid algorithm. So we can see this algorithm as a sequence of phases. So one phase for the Knuth algorithm is just a call to the Euclid algorithm. One phase for the Knuth algorithm is just the way I lose one component. So we have a sequence of phases. What is important for the analysis of such algorithm is to understand the dynamic of the algorithm, so the sequence of possible Euclidean division. And it's possible to describe this sequence of possible Euclidean division. So for each phase, the first Euclidean division may be specific because we may have to exchange the two integers because we have to know which one is the greatest one. But after we have a generic sequence of Euclidean division, and the last division is particular because we lose one component. So it may be specific also. So we can describe, in fact, the trajectory of the algorithm, the whole trajectory. And it's very important if we want to perform the analysis. And so, since we can describe all the trajectory, in fact, I have a bijection between the set of inputs and all the possible trajectories of the algorithm. So this kind of bijection is very important for the analysis. Okay, there are also other similarities. Both algorithms have a underlying dynamical system. So the dynamical system associated to the Knuth algorithm is the dynamical system associated to the Euclid algorithm. So it is the dynamical system associated to continued fraction expansion. So it is the Gauss map, this one. So fractional part of 1 over x. It's almost the same thing for the Brun algorithm, except that it is a higher dimensional dynamical system. So we have a sequence of integers, and the one step of the algorithm consists in inserting the remainder inside the queue of the inputs. So if we look at, instead of looking at the integers, I look at the rationals, the associated rational. In fact, I obtain the shift associated to the Brun algorithm, which is exactly this one. So we can compute it very easily. And so look, if I consider only two inputs, it means that d equal 1 in my notations. The Brun dynamical system is exactly fractional part of 1 over x. So it is exactly the Gauss map, the continued fraction dynamical system. So both dynamical systems are also well studied. So we know that these dynamical systems are ergodic and so on. They have many, many properties, in fact. And so we can use these properties in order to perform average case analysis, in fact. So, of course, you may don't understand. So we have, for instance, the continued fraction dynamical system is ergodic, expansive. The transfer operator, which is a generalization of the transition matrix for Markov chain, in fact. So that describes, in fact, the evolution of the density. Suppose that you have a density over the interval. What is the density after one step? It is given by the transfer operator. So it is a kind of matrix transition for Markov chain. We know that this operator admits a spectral gap and so on and so on. So we have a lot of information on this dynamical system and on tools related to this dynamical system. And with this information, we can perform average case analysis. But for the continued fraction algorithm, the GaussMap, we have much more information that coming from the work of Baladi-Vallée. And with this additional information, we can do distributional analysis, so in order to obtain limit laws, in fact. So I will give more information later. Okay, but no, from now on, it's sufficient to continue. So, what are the main results we obtain? First, since the algorithms are very similar, in fact, we can perform similar analysis and we obtain similar results. First, we prove that the total number of Euclidean division of both algorithms is linear with respect to the input size. Okay, I will speak about the constant later. We can say that almost all the Euclidean divisions are performed during the first phase. So during the first call for the Knuth algorithm and during the first phase for the Knuth algorithm. And the total number of divisions during the other phases is in average constant. So we have a linear number of Euclidean division performed during the first phase and only a constant number of Euclidean division performed during the other phases. So there is a great gap between the two family of phases. So, what about the constants here, mainly? Is it the same for both algorithms? No. In fact, for the Knuth algorithm, so for the naive one, the main important thing is that the constant does not depend on the dimension. And this is why Knuth said in his book that it is perhaps a very, very good algorithm. Why? Because when we perform the Euclid algorithm between two large integers, with high probability, the GCD will be small. So if you do this with the first two integers, in average, the first GCD will be small, and so the remainder of the work will be small. This is why Knuth said, I think that this algorithm is efficient, and it is efficient, and in average, it does not depend on the dimension. Of course, it depends on the distribution. Whereas, for the Brun algorithm, the constant is sublinear in the dimension. And we can see that by experiments, with experiments. So here, I increased the dimension, and I counted the number of Euclidean division, and you can see that the Knuth, as I increase the dimension, the complexity of the Knuth algorithm is not important. It does not depend on the dimension. So of course, I stop the algorithm as soon as I have a GCD equal 1, because I don't have to do all the other Euclidean division. Whereas for the Brun algorithm, we can see that it is sublinear in the dimension. So the Knuth algorithm is much better than the Brun algorithm for computing GCD. Okay, the Brun algorithm was not designed to do this, so it's normal. I mean, the Brun algorithm is designed to do rational approximation, so it's different. Okay, I won't give too much detail. What we also prove is that the Brun algorithm is very slow, and it is so slow that it only performs essentially no division, but only subtraction. So the division by 1. So the worst case of the Brun algorithm was performed by Lam, Shalit, and Vanstone. And they proved that it is linear with respect to the input size with a known constant. And we proved that this constant, asymptotically, when the dimension increases, in fact, it is the same constant as in the average case analysis. So in average, the Brun algorithm is in its worst case. So it only performs, in fact, subtraction. So it is an interesting fact. Okay, so we proved this. In fact, we proved that the number of subtraction when the dimension increases is close to 1, and experimentally, it is what we can see. Here you have the proportion of subtraction in an execution of the Brun algorithm, and we can see that, for instance, for the dimension 50, almost all the Euclidean division are in fact subtraction. So it is a slow algorithm. Okay, just to remember that there are similarities between both algorithms, but there is also a main difference, is that we have more information on the dynamical system relative to the continued fraction expansion, so to the Gauss map. So we can perform distribution analysis. And we did it, and we proved the following. In fact, we proved that the total number of Euclidean division of the Knuth algorithm follows asymptotically a beta limit law. So for us, it was a great surprise because we used to have Gaussian limit laws. And when we obtained beta limit laws, we were, what happened? We didn't understand it. So this can be mathematically expressed in this way. This is a beta limit law with parameter 1D. What we prove is that we also prove that the number of Euclidean division during the other phases, so say phase 2, follows, in fact, a geometric law or something which is very close to a geometric law for the integers input, for input integers. So we obtain also discrete laws for the other phases. So this gives us these cases. So for the first phase, we obtain a beta limit law. For the other phases, we obtain geometric laws. So we know that, for instance, the mean of a geometric law is a constant, which confirms that the fact that the number of Euclidean division during the second, the third phase, and so on, it is a discrete geometric law, and it is of constant order. Just a remark, a specific case is when a uniform law is just a specific case of a beta law. So when we have two inputs, in fact, we obtain the Euclid algorithm and we obtain the uniform law. Okay, so these were the results. Oh, I have time. So I will speak about the methodology. So it will be a little bit technical. Okay, so usually in our domain, in order to do a probabilistic analysis algorithm, we use a well-known methodology which is called analytic combinatorics. So in fact, we use generating functions. So this method was developed by Philippe Flageolet and Robert Sedgwick since the 80s. And we use, in fact, generating function first in a formal way, and then we see the generating function as analytical tools, in fact. So function of a complex variable. And there are two main phases in the method. first a symbolic phase, the symbolic method, and then an analytic phase using analytic tools. So I just give here the main idea. We have an algorithm, and we want to study a parameter on this algorithm. Formally, I can define a generating function relative to the algorithm and to the parameter. And the main important thing with this generating function is that the coefficient of this generating function are related to the mean, the variance, the law of the parameter I want to study. So I want to compute these coefficients. So I don't want exactly the exact value. I just need an asymptotic of the coefficient of the generating function. And it is well known in complex analysis that the asymptotic of a coefficient of a series is closely related to the singularities of this function. Just to give you an example. If I give you, for instance, 1 over 2z, it's just an example. This is this generating function. This is rather classical. Okay? So I know that this function has a singularity in, say, rho equal 1/2. And it gives us that the coefficient will be 1 over rho to the n. So as soon as I know where is the singularity, what is the position, what is its nature, a simple pole, double pole, and so on, I have information on the asymptotic. Okay? So what I need is to find the singularities of the generating function. And in order to find the singularities of the generating function, I need a formula of this generating function. I have, of course, a formal definition, but I need to find a formula that gives the singularities of the generating function. And as soon as I have this formula, I can do all the end of the method. But in order to obtain a formula, I use, in fact, dictionaries. I know that if the inputs are well structured, for instance, if I can say that the inputs is the Cartesian product of two sets of elements, I will be able to say that the generating function can be decomposed into a product. This is the formal method. So we can use here dictionary in order to obtain closed formula. This method works very well when we analyze Euclid algorithm or Euclidean algorithm on polynomials. It works very well. But when we study integers, we don't have these dictionaries. They disappear. So we have to find another path. And this is the dynamical analysis. So the other path is this one. I have an algorithm here, and I have a dynamical system relative to this algorithm. So it is the continued fraction, the Gauss map for the Euclid algorithm, or it is the Brun dynamical system for the Brun algorithm. So I have a dynamical system. I can formally define tools that are called transfer operators relative to my parameter. And I will use these transfer operators, in fact, to give an expression of my generating function. So my generating function will be expressed with using transfer operators. And for this, I will use a dictionary, but not a dictionary on generating function, a dictionary on transfer operators. So I use here a dictionary. I can express the generating function using the transfer operators. And so I can find the singularities. And here, the singularities of the generating function will be related to the spectral properties of the transfer operators. So I have to do a spectral analysis of the operators. This is the main difficult part of the methodology, in fact. But if I can do this, the end of the procedure is the same. So let's do it. But perhaps, yes, perhaps I will do it in a simple way. So the dynamical system relative to the Knuth algorithm is the Gauss map. So the Gauss map is a set of branches, and we are interested by the inverse bijection, in fact. So each restriction defines a bijection. So I am interested by the inverse bijection, so what I call inverse branches. And so the inverse branches are just the homographies relative to the Gauss map. So these are this one. And the set of inverse branches of depth 1 is H. But when I compose these inverse branches, I obtain the set of inverse branches of depth K. And the set of all the inverse branches of all depth is H star. So these are classical notation. What is important is that for each sequence of inverse branch, it corresponds to an execution of the Euclid algorithm. So for instance, here you have an execution of the Euclid algorithm. In fact, it builds a sequence of inverse branches, or equivalently, it builds the continued fraction expansion. So it's well known. So in fact, there is a bijection between the set of possible sequence of inverse branches and the set of inputs. So for the Euclid algorithm, we know that all the possible inverse branches is H star, so all the possible sequence, but we know that the last division, the quotient of the last division is different, must be greater than 2. So the last set of inverse branches is this one. So this is the sequence of possible inverse branches during the execution of the Euclid algorithm. This is a sequence of generic Euclidean division, except the last one, because we want a proper continued fraction expansion. So we have here the bijection. Okay, now I am interested by the dynamic of a dynamical system. So my question is the following. Suppose that I have an initial distribution over 0, 1, the identity or something else. What is the distribution after one step? Then this distribution is given by, in fact, the transfer operator. So, in fact, the density transformer, where S here equal 1. So it's just a generalization of the matrix transition for Markov chain. So if you know what is a Markov chain, if you know what is its matrix transition, this is exactly the same thing, but for dynamical system. No more. So these transfer operators are functional operators. And we add a parameter S because we have generating function, so we need a complex parameter. And if I am interested by k iteration of my Gauss map, then the associated transfer operator is just this one, my transfer operator to the k, and it involves inverse branch of depth k. So what I did here for the Gauss map, it's also true for the Brun dynamical system and so on. I can do this for mainly whole dynamical system. Okay. So my transfer operator here involve all the inverse branches. But I can restrict this definition to a set of inverse branches. Look here, I have a set of all inverse branches, but here I don't have all the possible inverse branches. So for a given set of inverse branches, I can define a transfer operator. Just the sum is over the inverse branches of the set. That's all. And I have a dictionary now on the transfer operator. Suppose that I have two sets of inverse branches. I have two associated transfer operators. Then, if I consider the disjoint union between two sets of inverse branches, then the associated transfer operator is just the sum. Just take the definition, it's very easy. Now, if I am more interested by the composition of two sets of inverse branches, then the transfer operator will be also the composition, but in reverse order. So it's a technical detail. So just take the definition, it's immediate. And now, if I am interested by a sequence of inverse branches, so a sequence is just a disjoint union of Cartesian product of composition. So this line is just a consequence of the two previous one, and what do I obtain is a quasi-inverse, what we call a quasi-inverse. So this is an operator here. Okay, so this is only a formal, a formal definition of operators. At this step, I am not interested by the analytical properties of such operators. It's only formal manipulation. Of course, in order to have here an inverse, it must have a sense, an analytical sense, but we will see that later. So, how can we use this to analyze our algorithm? Remember, both algorithms are a sequence of phases, a sequence of call to the Euclid algorithm, or a sequence of Euclidean division for the Brun algorithm. For each phase, I know exactly what are the possible sequence of Euclidean division. It means that I know perfectly what are the possible first Euclidean division, what are the possible generic Euclidean division, what are the possible last Euclidean division. So it means that we can define transfer operator for each phase, because I know exactly what are the possible inverse branches. And of course, the transfer operator relative to the whole execution of the algorithm is just the composition of each phase. So we have a bijection between the inputs and the possible trajectories of the algorithm. And so the associated transfer operator is this one. So we have one operator for each phase. And now, I will relate these operators with my generating function. But I have to show you what are these generating functions. So what is important in this generating function, it's not the formula. You can forget the formula. The main important is that I will be interested by the bivariate generating function, and the parameter S, in fact, marks the size of the input. Whereas the parameter W marks the parameter I am studying. So this generating function is just the sum over all the possible inputs of something, it doesn't matter, that involves two parameters. The first one marks the size of the input, the second one marks the parameter. And what is important here is to see that I can relate the coefficient of the generating function to the main probabilistic value of my parameter. So for instance, if I am interested by the mean of my parameter, I can compute it using the coefficient of the generating function. So it's not important for you to understand the formula, you just understand how we use them. Okay? So believe me, using the generating function, we can find the main probabilistic values of my parameter, the mean, the variance, the limit laws, and so on and so on. So the main difficulty is to give an expression of this generating function. And for this, I will use my transfer operator. So, for instance, so I will use this one. So my bivariate generating function depends on two variables, S and W. And it involves, in fact, the transfer operators of each phase. But if I am interested by the number of steps during for instance, the phase 3, I will modify my transfer operator corresponding to phase 3 in order to deal with my parameter. So, in fact, it looks like my initial transfer operator, a sequence of it, but I modify just one of them in order to count the number of steps. So it's very easy for me. It's very easy to do this. Of course, for you, it's much more complicated. But the important thing here is to understand that I can express my generating function using the transfer operators. And, okay, when I study the phase 3, for instance, I have to study the transfer operator associated to this phase. And this transfer operator has this shape. So it corresponds to the last Euclidean division, the first Euclidean division, and the generic one inside the phase. And each time I use one operator, in fact, I do one step. So I put a W just behind this transfer operator, because it allows me to count the number of steps of the algorithm. So it's just very intuitive. So these operators are very complicated, but once more, the most important thing in this operator is this one. It is the quasi-inverse. The quasi-inverse will bring a dominant singularity, a singularity. In fact, each quasi-inverse has a singularity. This one may have a singularity, but it won't be dominant. It won't be the greatest one or the smallest one. It depends on the generating function. But in fact, each quasi-inverse brings a dominant pole. When I study the average value of a parameter, I have to use a derivation. And when the derivative of a quasi-inverse gives two quasi-inverse. It's the same thing. When the derivative of 1 over 1 minus z, it gives us two quasi-inverse. So this is a quasi-inverse, a simple quasi-inverse, when the derivative of this quasi-inverse gives, in fact, two quasi-inverse. It's the same thing for transfer operator, exactly the same thing. Why it is important? Because I want to study the means. And now, perhaps I can go faster, yes. So, when I study the mean, I will have two quasi-inverse for the phase I study, and only one for the other phase. So, for instance, I have two quasi-inverse here, and 1, 1, 1, 1, and so on. But among the quasi-inverses here, only one is important. It is the quasi-inverse of the first phase, because it is this one that will bring a dominant singularity. So in fact, the most important quasi-inverse in all this sequence is the quasi-inverse here. So if I am studying the first phase, I will have two dominant quasi-inverse because I have the derivative, whereas if I study the other phases, I will only have one because the derivative is over the other quasi-inverses. And this is the main difference between the first phase and the other phases. So the quasi-inverse has a singularity at one point, but only the first one will bring one dominant singularity. So it's not very interesting to study these other ones. I have only to study the dominant one, and I only have to count how many quasi-inverse of the first phase I have. So I do it. If I am interested by the first phase, so phase 0, excuse me, I have two dominant quasi-inverse, whereas if I am interested by the other phases, I have only one dominant quasi-inverse. So I will have a dominant singularity, a double dominant singularity for the first phase, whereas I will have a simple dominant singularity for the other phase. And that's all. This explains why we have a linear number of Euclidean division during the first phase, and why we only have a constant number of Euclidean division during the first phase. So just to show you why we have a different asymptotic, just think about the generating function 1 over z. We have here a simple pole, and the coefficient is of constant order. Okay? Now, if I am interested by this one, I will have something like that. So perhaps I have to up and minus 1. So the asymptotic is linear. So when the singularity, when the pole is double, when it is a double pole, I have a linear asymptotic. When it is a simple pole, I have a constant asymptotic. This is why we have the difference between the first phase and the other phase. We have a double pole for when we study the first phase. We have a simple pole when we study the other phases. And that's all. So I now conclude. So I tried to show you how to perform a dynamical analysis, at least for the algorithm. So I have omitted a lot of details, but the main idea, I hope the main ideas were given. So we proved that the Knuth algorithm is much more efficient than the Brun algorithm. And in addition, it is the Knuth algorithm does not depend on the dimension, at least in average. So it is a very interesting characteristic. In fact, we would like to do the same thing with all the other algorithms as said before. So the Poincaré algorithm, the Selmer algorithm, the subtractive algorithm, and so on, and so on, and so on. We would like to perform also distributional analysis. We only perform average case analysis for the Brown algorithm, but we have to extend the works of Baladi and Vallée to do those distributional analysis. So we would like to do such analysis for all the algorithm as said previously. And we plan to study inside an ANR project to study finite and periodic trajectories that corresponds to periodic trajectories of the continued fraction or other dynamical system. And what is important is that we want to perform this kind of analysis for all the possible algorithms in order to compare them, in fact. So we were interested by the computation of GCD, but we may be interested by approximation by parameters relative to approximation, rational approximation, and so on. So we will see. So thank you very much. Which parameters? In fact, we studied only the number of steps of this algorithm, which is a parameter relative to the complexity of the algorithm. But we may be interested by the output of the algorithm, the quality of the output. So the quality of the approximation, if you give no more a rational at the input, but perhaps a real, what is after, say, I don't know, 10 steps, what is the quality of the output? So, or either if I give you a large rational and I only want a smaller one to approximate it, how many steps do I have to do in order to have a good approximation? Yes, for instance. And we may be interested also by Bezout coefficient and so on, so that are more interested for other application. So it was only one parameter, but there are a lot of other parameters.
Is there any progress regarding the problem of fixing one number, so 25, and getting the other number?
So.
So you fix, suppose you want to have now but and fix one of them and you let the other one free. So this is a different problem until eventually we have an analysis.
Yes. Usually it gives the same result. At least each time it was performed, it was not performed using dynamical analysis because what is important for us is to have the trajectory of the algorithm. So we need to know what are the possible Euclidean division. So we need this. As soon as you add a constraint on the input, so you have a constraint on the sequence of possible Euclidean division. And as soon as we cannot describe this constraint, we cannot perform the analysis. So dynamical analysis, until now, is not well adapted when you fix one input and take the second one at random. Both must be random. But if you can describe the trajectory, we can do it. So we need to describe the trajectory. So no advance in this direction. Not yet.
Not yet.